Rachel, one thing that I see in my practice that is equally frustrating for both practitioners and patients is some of the limitations that we have when it comes to vaginal dryness and painful sex. And I don't think there's a population that really hits this home better than the breast cancer population, because they are often thrusted into an instantaneous menopause with sudden vaginal dryness, which is really different than the gradual steps that natural menopause provides. I love talking to Holly to hear that this population of people just struck such a chord with her, and she knew that was the unmet need she wanted to really work on.
And what's really cool is when Holly started this company, she's a young woman. She hadn't yet started her family. She's dealing often with patients who have suffered something, or they cancer survivors, and they are going through menopause. And how does that work, by the way? If you're immediately, this is really not for posting, but if you're immediately thrust into menopause, isn't there also some deterioration in your hormone level after that?
Oh, absolutely. So through natural menopause, the transition is that, the estrogen secretion from your ovaries is going to be a little bit volatile with peaks and valleys, and eventually it will diminish to little to none. But with many cancer patients, the treatment occurs when menopause has not started yet, or maybe early in the perimenopausal transition. And so rather than having this gradual volatility of estrogen, you are just from one day to the next forced into an automatic menopause with literally every molecule of estrogen being sucked out of your body, whether that's surgical or medical.
One of the things that I think is so important, we talk about menopause a lot, but it's in the context of a much bigger discussion, which is enjoyment and pleasure. And that's not the only thing we're talking about. We had fun on this talking to Holly, because every time you get to say the word vagina on this podcast, we get excited. We feel like we've been liberated. But that we're talking about not just people who suffered with a serious illness, although that is the first, the lowest hanging fruit of people who would really benefit from this, but that we're not talking about fixing something. We're talking about hopefully creating better experiences that menopausal people or cancer survivors used to have. And it might just be getting back to their baseline. It might be getting back to better than before, but the conversation is much more important now and much more nuanced, which is really exciting to see.
Well, you know what we always say, sexual health and general health go hand in hand. So let's talk to Holly.
Welcome to the Business of the V. Hello, friends and colleagues. I'm Dr. Alyssa Dweck.
And I'm Rachel Braun-Scherl. Each week, we bring you the most fascinating investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, academics, and healthcare practitioners who are making things happen in women's sexual and reproductive health.
If you are a woman, know a woman, have a business, or care about your V health and wellness, fasten your seatbelts and listen in to another informative and inspiring episode.
We are so excited to have our guest today, Holly Rockweiler, who's the founder and CEO of Madorra. Welcome. It's great to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I always love talking to you. Every time I see you and speak to you, I learn something. But start with the story of Madorra, and in what context did you come up with the idea for the business and what it is?
Sure. Well, I have to say it's mutual, to be honest. So thanks for having me. So let's see. So Madorra started as a spin out of the Stanford Biodesign program, which is a program that's basically applying design thinking to medical technology innovation. And so folks come to that program, like myself, for example. I came out of my training's in biomedical engineering. I was working at Boston Scientific. So coming out of industry, there's also physicians who come into the program. You are put on a team, and then you're given a focus area, and then really taught a process for developing new solutions. But it really starts with unmet need. And that is like from an engineer's perspective, really exciting. We got to go into Stanford Hospital for the first month or so of the program and just shadow physicians and meet patients and other healthcare providers and talk to them about what problems they were facing. And that is the foundation for Madorra. So in that process, we found, as you can imagine, lots of problems that we would want to tackle as a team. And Madorra's unmet need was really driven by meeting women, specifically breast cancer survivors, who had this problem of vaginal dryness and were feeling really frustrated because they were caught between really having no good options and their physicians acknowledging that and just feeling like the healthcare system was kind of leaving them behind. And so as we started to pull that thread, as the process taught us and interview more women, we found it wasn't just breast cancer survivors. I mean, that group of patients is specifically contraindicated or not allowed to use the gold standard treatment, which is hormone replacement therapy. But as we kind of pulled that thread, we found there were so many other women that we talked to who didn't have a cancer history, but felt uncomfortable for, a variety of reasons using hormones. And they too felt like they were being left behind. So that was the real nidus, was, really meeting those patients and hearing directly from them how much, they didn't really have a voice. And so I think that was really exciting to us. And by the way, credit to the program, that was one of like hundreds of problems that we uncovered. And then the program, we spent the next year at Stanford really filtering down that list and figuring out what the right problem for us to work on was, which we ended up spinning out into Madorra.
Terrific. Well, I consider Alyssa a global menopause whisperer. So you've covered so many topics. You talked about hormones. You've talked about concern about hormones, cancer. Alyssa, break it down so, we can understand. We've had this conversation many times about the fear mongering around hormones, but there are patients who are very well suited to hormone replacement, and then those who are not, and then those who just don't like the idea. So talk a little bit about how you do that assessment when patients come into your office.
Yes, of course. So first, what an unmet need you are tackling, because I see this in practice day in and day out. And, the nuances with the breast cancer patient is that more and more we're seeing them at a really young age. So they are literally thrown into an instant menopause with the treatments that are provided to them to literally suck every molecule of estrogen out of their body in an effort to cure and prevent any recurrence of cancer. So that's sort of the baseline. This is as opposed to your standard menopausal person who is gradually going to note a diminishment of estrogen because the ovaries stop producing so much, but it's gradual so that the vaginal symptoms may come kind of slowly and they can be addressed at kind of an earlier stage. So I think that sort of sets the groundwork for what you're trying to do. At this point, there is a little bit of a difference between, menopause hormone replacement therapy and minimally absorbed vaginal estrogen, which in some cases, and kind of as a last resort, if nothing else is working, can be used in this population. But, believe me, it is never a first choice for clinicians because it's a little scary. And, patients have been kind of, poised to believe that this could be a real detriment to their recovery and future. So it's not really the first line at all.
I'm curious for both of you. You're in the process of developing the product, Holly and Alyssa, you're seeing patients. Is there some confluence of factors you're seeing that there's now this groundswell of people looking for non-hormonal options for birth control and non-hormonal options for menopause? What was sort of the turning point? Forget that people were terrified for years. Now there's a group of people, obviously, who understand that they can use hormones. But what has been sort of creating this gold rush around non-hormonal solutions?
You want to go first? You want me to go first?
Oh, go for it, Holly.
Okay. I was going to say, well, I really appreciate the comment that you made as well. And I think also talking about menopausal person, I think that's something, it's a catch myself. I love that you said that. I think that's something, at Madorra, we're about vaginas, whoever the owner is. And so we're, we do not want to be, excluding anyone. And I think, women's health, MTech are kind of more popular terms now. But the minute it's in, it's like the minute it's out. It's like suddenly not as inclusive we want it to be. So thank you for saying that. And I also agree that it is a nuanced conversation around hormones. And what we found was that patients were feeling ill-equipped to actually make the decision themselves. And we're wanting to rely on their healthcare provider, who good providers like you are giving them this information. And it's just a lot. So in terms of the groundswell, I think, to be honest, we started the company 8 years ago, and people were talking to us about wanting non-hormonal options, even if, they were perfectly cleared to use hormones for whatever reason, like I was mentioning. So I think that the groundswell, frankly, is just people feeling comfortable speaking up, because I think that, for instance, in the contraception world, like the Paragard IUD without hormones has been around, I don't even know how long, for years. And so there's a lot of, I think, due to this public perception of hormones, or the fact that it's a nuanced conversation, some people are just like, I don't want to deal with it. And thankfully, these topics are now being discussed more. I think that's part of it, but I'd be curious what your perspective is being in practice and what you're seeing.
Yeah, well, I think that the comfort level around speaking about vaginal dryness, using the word vagina, talking about painful sex is much more acceptable than it once was. And, I can see that spanning the years of my career where, at the beginning of my career, we never talked about that, and it was the rare person who brought up that they were having, trouble in the bedroom, if you will. So I think the conversation around this has just grown so much, and that's part of the success. The other thing is that, moisturizers and lubricants have been around forever. Let's just talk about lubricants, because lubricants are over the counter. There's loads of different varieties, brands, preferences, and whatnot. And, some people just consider this for pleasure. Others consider this to mitigate pain. And really, it serves dual purpose. So I think that's something that needs to be considered. But I'd like to hear more about your device, because, there is a lot of snake oil out there in regard to other or potential devices, other possible remedies for this issue. So why don't you tell us about the nuances of the device you're working on?
Sure. Yeah. So in answer to, this conversation about these needs that we heard, we said, well, there has to be a better way to treat this. And to your point, lubricants, moisturizers, the over-the-counter category of stuff, it's been exciting to see that growing as well in the last 10 years in terms of better ingredients, better products, better marketing, frankly, to, really our target demographic. But that's really good for first line therapy. And that's where most people should start. But if they need something more, we said, okay, what other options could be available to patients that, is there something we could develop that would do what estrogen does without, that perceived risk and some of the real risks? And so we did a bunch of research and determined one of the key aspects to vaginal lubrication is actually vaginal blood flow. So we said, well, there's a lot of ways in medical devices and in medical technology to increase blood flow in the body. But again, credit to the Stanford program. Through our conversations with women, we'd kind of developed this criteria in terms of what women were looking for. We didn't have a solution in mind when we interviewed them, but we just kind of, again, using that design thinking approach, pointed questions about what they would be looking for. So we had this nice kind of criteria, and we knew that women wanted something in the home, non-invasive, that they could control themselves. And so that allowed us to really gear our brainstorming towards solutions like that. And what we've settled on and what we've spent the last 8 years and are continuing to work on developing is a home use ultrasound device that can be administered completely from outside the body and allows a rekindling of sorts of the body's natural lubricating pathways. So the device, like I said, it uses ultrasound and it's placed right at the opening of the vaginal canal. So importantly, it doesn't go inside. Again, that came from these interviews we had with patients. Some of them have really friable or delicate tissue, and the thought of inserting anything could be really painful for them. So this was our, way to achieve what we want to achieve, sort of at a distance outside the body. And the ultrasound waves, when engaged, then increase the body's, again, natural lubricating pathway, which is the vaginal blood flow. So that was the idea on paper. And then we've spent several years and grants and investor funding to develop the clinical evidence to back that up. So you mentioned, there's a lot of snake oil out there. I think that has been the case. I think I've seen a lot more folks being committed to real transparency and development and clinical evidence. It's not cheap to get clinical evidence, but our thesis is that it will really pay off. It's a very strong investment because that's the thing we also learned, and probably all listeners of your podcast are well aware that this is a very savvy consumer segment, meaning they want to do a lot of research. And so to my point before, they don't want to be overwhelmed by medical literature, but they want to know that what they're purchasing is backed by good science and good physicians and other healthcare providers. So we have said, this commitment to clinical data is really going to help propel a solution like this that's totally different. When we talk about what we're doing, people just assume it's another lubricant or just assume it's a new flavor of hormones, for example. But this is so new. We really need this evidence to bring along the patients and also the providers, because the product will be a prescription product. And so we want that partnership with provider and patient to feel confident about using the product.
I have a question because I was doing my due diligence and I'm very interested to see how this is going to work. And, I do see a swing in my practice where people are much more interested in at least non-hormonal options first, and then maybe they'll switch to something hormonal if that's not working. But I happened to come across, the clinical study that you're probably speaking of, talking about a breakthrough device designation status from the FDA. I've never heard of this, but why would I? And I think this sounds really amazing. So can you talk a little about that?
Sure. Thank you. I'd love to. So that's a special program that FDA has created to help expedite exciting technologies to market. And I think they've used that word expedite very carefully. So it doesn't lower the bar for what should be required to get FDA approval, but they're putting more resources towards products that they think are really important to help get them onto the market faster. And so the breakthrough status, you qualify for that if you're treating something that's either life-threatening or severely debilitating, and then also in a brand new way, in an innovative way. And so we thought we were a perfect fit for that. We know, having talked to patients, how debilitating this can be, and credit to FDA. I mean, it was a conversation with them. I don't know that folks would have originally thought that vaginal atrophy would qualify under this umbrella, but definitely, and I'm sure you've seen in your practice, really severe cases can be awful on a daily life, problems with walking, wiping, urinating, et cetera. And so that status was awarded to us in 2021. And like I said, it will help bring us more resources at FDA. And we've already seen that through some of our conversations. So we get kind of more senior leadership involvement. They're, promoting that they'll be more more collaborative and flexible in some of the design. So I think it's really exciting. And frankly, I love that we got it, because I also kind of, to the beginning of this conversation of just opening up the dialogue, like FDA has said vaginas matter. I mean, we all thought that, we all knew that, but here is a government bureaucracy saying it. It's like, it's a whole new world, folks. This is really great.
That's a whole other reason to celebrate in and of itself.
Exactly.
One quick question, since we're talking about enhancing blood flow, and again, just to go back, less estrogen means less blood flow to the vagina, means less natural moisture or transudate that or lubricant that the vagina makes. Since this is enhancing blood flow, or that's the presumed mechanism, and it's used externally, are there other benefits that might be noted, like for vulva dryness, everything on the outside, or for any urinary complaints? Because after all, all of these organs are kind of intertwined when it comes to less estrogen. Did you incidentally see other benefits?
That's a great question. So, yes and no. So we always want to be very clear about what we are doing. And we are very focused on dryness and atrophy. But to your point, it's not just the dryness, the tissue itself. And so that is what we've started to see through our clinical work, is that over time, not only are we increasing lubrication, but that is leading to improvements in the tissue health itself. And so that, I guess, is an incidental benefit, so to speak, but we were hoping for that all along, because we knew that would lead to more lasting benefits. I mean, you have to keep just like the hormones, you have to keep using the Madorra product to maintain the benefit. But what we've seen is really high compliance in our trials. So patients are happy to do that. With respect to the urinary side of things, I think it's an interesting question. It's something we'd want to study in the future from a direct, scientific mechanism of action. I would not expect that we'd have, any benefit there. Our energy is not applied there. It's really focused on the vaginal canal. But to your point, that's another big unmet need. And so something that we would certainly want to potentially come up with other solutions to help with if ours didn't in the future, also help with that.
So here's today's hot flash. Those undergoing certain treatments for breast cancer, ovary cancer, and uterine cancer may find themselves in an instant menopause.
So where are you in terms of time to market, expected launch? Obviously, I know with COVID that it took longer for a lot of the clinical studies. You were doing some in Australia. Where are you? So people who are listening and are saying, this is exactly for me, when can they get it? When should they be thinking about talking to their healthcare practitioner?
Well, first they should call their favorite venture capitalist and tell them to call Madorra.
It's a new element in patient care. You call your favorite VC
dial
first.
your venture capitalist. Yeah. So sadly, we are not on the market yet, but we're on our way. So we're clinical stage. We have a clinical map of what we need to do to get through the FDA. Again, through this breakthrough status, we've had a great engagement with the agency. So we know exactly what we need to do. And it's really just a matter of executing that trial, which, as I'm sure you both know, takes all kinds of resources on all sides. That's why I was making the joke. So that's where we are. But if folks want to, stay in touch with us on our website, I think you can join our mailing list, which we do not send much out. Once we open our US trial, we will plan to send things out there. And then we have social media accounts as well.
Share some of the handles and the address so that people can find it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Jump right in.
So our website is Madorra.com. So I like to say it's like Madonna, but with 2 R's instead of 2 N's. Easy to remember. And then to be honest,
you think at some point she'll be saying that? My name is Madonna. It's like Madorra, but with 2 N's.
We will have really arrived at that point.
Exactly.
I was like, Rachel, you're going to make fun of me. I'm terrible with social media. I think it's at Madorra Medical for Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, I believe.
So I have a question that you may not even be able to answer, but in my practice, oftentimes people just are given medical advice and a prescription to go ahead, dust off their vibrator and use that to enhance blood flow, because it is really like muscle massage or tissue massage and does enhance blood flow, especially for the faint of heart. They appreciate a prescription or doctor's orders for this. And you can get that type of device fairly inexpensively now on your own. What do you suppose the cost of this device is going to be? Because that seems to really be an access issue for lots of patients when it comes to things like fancy dilators or certain medications that are new, things that are new from the FDA.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think that's something that we've been razor focused on. And I will say credit to this, your community of healthcare providers, that they're also thinking about that. I used to work in the cardiac space. All that's covered by insurance typically, but like the cost of the patient never once came up in a conversation with a physician. And so that's been a really refreshing kind of side of working in this space. So our product, we intend to have an upfront cost for the device and then a monthly cost for the disposables. Our goal with this commitment to clinical evidence, though, is to develop reimbursement so that the product can be paid for by insurance and that the out-of-pocket spend, would just be whatever your deductible is for your program, because we do think access is really important. Just like FDA clearance, reimbursement takes time as well. So typically, as you probably many of your podcast guests have talked about, when you launch a new product like this, you don't have reimbursement right away. You need to develop that over time. And so unfortunately, there is, I shouldn't say maybe, unfortunately, but for some, it's probably great. There's going to need to be like an out-of-pocket spend in the beginning. And that's something we were aware of when we started the company. But kind of to your point, there's a lot of precedent around out-of-pocket spending in this category already. So you brought up some great examples, over-the-counter stuff. Sometimes insurance does cover hormone replacement therapy, but the out-of-pocket spending to get, the specific, brand someone wants, or if they want to go compounded and get some specific formulation, they're spending anywhere from like $50 to $250 out of pocket, right? Yeah, exactly. So
absolutely. I mean, for dilators, it's typically not covered. Maybe on flex spending. Some of the newer oral or systemic medications used for dryness and painful sex are often not covered, and we always get pushed back to some sort of generic estrogen used vaginally. But I just wondered, and it seems like if it's an FDA approved device, it'll be a little bit easier to navigate.
Definitely. And again, reimbursement it's similar to FDA, it's really based on clinical evidence. And so that's been really our thesis from the beginning, but, meeting the needs of all the stakeholders in the ecosystem so that we can really deliver the product ultimately to the patients who need it. And not all of them, or none of them should have to pay out of pocket, right? We can talk about how much Viagra is covered by insurance. So this is a very similar
That's
thing.
a whole nother podcast.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
So what I think is your superpower is no matter what is going on in your professional and personal life, at least on the surface, you look unflappable. I think you told me once you were about to go into labor while you were doing a pitch, but I'm curious for people who are watching. You've been at this for, 8 or 9 years. You're growing a company. You're building your family. What are some tips you give to people who it is hard, even if you don't make it look hard? Everybody knows it's hard. What are some tips for staying sane and just being so focused? You've always been so clear about what your end goal was. And I think perhaps that might be how you keep it all together. So what appears to be so effortlessly.
Well, that's really kind. Thank you. And, we have known each other for a while, so it's helpful to hear that from you. So thank you, because I does not feel that always on this side. But let's see. I think, to your point of staying focused, that's really critical, thinking about, whoever I'm speaking to, I talk about, really what motivates you. And for me personally, and for the members of my team, I know this because we talk about it a lot. It's really about the patient and bringing this to them. I mean, I was fortunate enough to do a leadership fellowship program called the Fairland Fellowship 2 years ago. And one of the aspects of that program was helping you develop your personal brand. And really what that was uncovering the brand you have and just helping you articulate that, I think. And through that process, I learned, they gave me this phrase and I love it. It's that I'm an advocate in a lab coat. I'm someone who really cares about equal rights for all. And, really passionate about underserved and unmet needs. And this is my way as a biomedical engineer to help advocate for the importance of vaginas everywhere. And I think that that's really freeing and helps me feel really inspired. So just, piece one is staying tapped into what inspires you. So 3, it's patience and knowing that this is how I can help. And then I think the other side that's so hard to do is take care of yourself. I feel like it's so hard to do. I mean, you both, I'm sure, have dealt with this as well. It's like very easy to put yourself last in your own family, in your work and everything. And so, I mean, just even on Friday, I was going through this, just like having a low day. And I was like, I'm working out and I'm showering. It's going to be a good day. Like the simplest thing that
Go crazy, take a shower.
Right? I love that. But I also always have subscribed to the more you have to do, the more you get done. So it seems like you're making that look particularly easy. We are so excited to watch this come to life. It's going to be a game changer for my patients, I know. And I think more so than just the breast cancer population, who surely was the impetus for this. But thank you for all of the work you're doing. And we'll be watching.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for creating a platform for companies like us to talk about what we're doing, help get the word out. Because, it's great to be developing solutions, but ultimately it needs to connect with the providers and the patients who need them. So thanks for everything you're doing to help us.
You bet. Thanks.
Keep up the good work. We'll see you soon.
Don't forget, Subscribe to our podcast at businessofthev.com for the latest trends and trendsetters in women's health and business.